see us today for purposes of responding to any of those questions that had been slated for today. We will therefore proceed with the other business indicated in the order paper, unless, of course, the majority leader has something to share with the Senate. Proceed.
Mr. Speaker, this is a very grave matter, and I don't think the fact that the minister called you is sufficient. She may have called you maybe on matters to do with Kilifi County, but not with the Senate, because she is not invited here to come and meet the Speaker. And much as you extended courtesy of receiving her call, the minister needs to know that this House is terribly disappointed in her conduct. CS Aisha Jumwa, a long-serving parliamentarian who's been here in Parliament for over 10 years, knows very well that when there is a conflict of diaries between the executive and appearance in Parliament, the legislature takes precedence. I know President William Ruto very well. If any minister were to tell him that I cannot make it to your meeting because I am scheduled to appear before Parliament, he can never recall that minister to appear before them, either at cabinet or at an official briefing, at the expense of the representatives of the people. This behavior by CS Aisha Jumwa is something that I find quite astounding, because while ministers and her colleagues have been before this House 3, 4, 5 times, her and the Prime Cabinet Secretary are the two ministers that have never set foot in the Senate. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I'd wish, with your guidance, and I'm willing to be persuaded by colleagues, maybe who you may grant an opportunity to say a thing or two about this, the conduct of these two ministers, Mr. Speaker, that let us be bound by the collective reasoning of the House, because it is not proper for, I have seen the letter from the office of the Prime Cabinet Secretary. There's an officer by the name Joseph N. Busiega. These are people who need not be in public offices, and I'm not excusing the Prime Cabinet Secretary. But by the time you're writing a letter at 3:57 p.m. for a meeting that is supposed to happen the following morning at 9 a.m., are you normal? Do you know what you're doing in that public office, Mr. Speaker? This cannot be entertained. And I cannot allow Parliament, Mr. Speaker, to be treated like this. Therefore, we have to register our disappointment with both ministers in the strongest terms possible, including the amendment that we have just done to the Powers and Privilege Act, Mr. Speaker. Unfortunately, the amendment is yet to become official law of the land, because it still has to go through the National Assembly, Mr. Speaker. But if it were up to me, we need to issue summons to both ministers, because, first of all, we need to establish whether they recognize that Parliament is bicameral. And therefore, because I am sure they have appeared before our colleagues in the National Assembly, and therefore I don't get what their spite about the Senate is and what their motivation might be, Mr. Speaker. There is nothing that members are begging. You're coming to respond to issues of the representatives of the people, which the people of Kenya are asking you as a minister through their elected representatives in this House. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I want to be guided by colleagues in their consideration of this matter, so that we make a decision jointly as a House on what to do. And finally, Mr. Speaker, we will eventually have to make a decision on the number of times a minister can skip appearance, and the maximum number they need to exhaust on postponement, especially postponement. We issued directives the other day on what is a standard letter that you write to Parliament. It cannot be you just say you can't appear, no suggestion when you are next available, no credible reason why you're not appearing. Therefore, without appearing to be lamenting, Mr. Speaker, I want to humbly request that we take a decision as a House on what to do with these two ministers. I thank you.
Senator Sifuna.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, you caught me just confirming with the law on whether this House can actually impose the same sort of sanctions that we've seen imposed by committees on witnesses who fail to appear before those committees. And I think I've said enough about CS Aisha Jumwa, and I have no more to say. As a legislator, you have advised us on more than one occasion that this cannot be a house of lamentations. So I think we need to proceed and impose a fine in accordance with the law for the non-appearance of the CS Aisha Jumwa. As to my brother, the Cabinet Secretary for Foreign Affairs, Musalia Mudavadi, I have never seen him in this house since these rules were promulgated and the number of times that has been invited here. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I have the privilege of sitting on the SBC, and I remember one time he's the one who wrote a letter to this house saying that you cannot summon a cabinet secretary if there is only one question to answer, and that we should wait until there is enough material for him to be able to appear before this house. And I remember the direction that we took as SBC. We said it could be the most critical question in the country right now. And I want to thank some of the CSs who have appeared here. Last week, Honorable Speaker, the CS for Defense, Aden Duale, appeared to answer one question on the reopening of Uhuru Park. And I think he left everybody here satisfied. The people of Nairobi are happy. The park is now open. We cannot be told such stories, Mr. Speaker. And because you have directed us that we should not be a house of lamentations, I want the fate that befalls Aisha Jumwa to befall the CS for Foreign Affairs, so that he also feels the pinch. And I want to request that we expedite the changes that we made to the Parliamentary Powers and Privileges Act, so that, Mr. Speaker, the enhanced fine might be a dissuasion, or might dissuade some people from failing to appear before the Senate. Mr. Speaker, it has been a very difficult night here in Nairobi because we are trying to coordinate responses to incidents of flooding all across the city, and I'm sure this is a matter that everyone is aware of. But even though we did not get much sleep, we woke up in time to be able to be here this morning because we have critical questions to answer. And if you look at the range of questions and the discussion that we were to have here, especially on arrest, detention, and deportation of Kenyans in diaspora, these are critical matters, Mr. Speaker. I have a very critical case that has gone on, I think, since before the elections. One of our key supporters from Western Kenya, Professor Ruth Onyango, her son was arrested in the US during the crackdown on the opioid epidemic, Mr. Speaker. And he is a qualified doctor, pharmacist. And that young man has languished in jail at an undisclosed location, and we are unable to get any information on his whereabouts and whether he's okay. It would have been a nice opportunity for the CS, who comes from that very same county where that young man comes from, to give answers to the family of that young boy. So, Mr. Speaker, I express my disappointment, but I want us to proceed in line with the law and impose those fines and issue summons so that if they fail to appear, other consequences can follow. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Mungatana.
Mr. Speaker, on my part, Mr. Speaker, I rise on defense of the Cabinet Secretary in charge of Foreign Affairs. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Musalia Mudavadi was before our committee for delegated legislation 2 days ago. He came on time, waited, and we had to wait for quorum to form. He went to the office, he came back and appeared before us and tackled every question that we put before us, that we put before him. So I'm very surprised that today his behavior is totally different from what he displayed at the committee. And I know that the very heavy issue that we were tackling there, we were able to find a way forward. Mr. Speaker, Having said all that, the issue I was trying to drive at is that there are some cabinet secretaries who have defied this House. And there are some cabinet secretaries who have been very cooperative with this House. Now, the question is, are we speaking with records? Are we speaking with facts? Mr. Speaker, I have a recollection of your ruling that guided that we should not be people to lament on issues. Instead, we should take action, which Honorable Sifuna has proposed. But the way you actually guided is not what the Honorable Senator is proposing. What you said is that a proper motion should be brought for us to censure. My own take, Mr. Speaker, is that nothing stops the majority leader, Mr. Speaker, from originating a letter when he's giving his weekly statement. Instead of just talking of how many questions we have done, how many statements we have done, what the committees have done, he should also say that there is this minister and that minister who never turned up, so that we have a proper record. And when we then move, we are all in agreement as a House that this particular minister didn't turn up, and in the weekly report by the majority leader, he didn't show up on this date, on this date, on this date, so that we can have a track, and then when we come, we pass a unanimous vote. But Mr. Speaker, the way it is, that we are talking without really putting the facts on the table, it would not be helpful. So, Mr. Speaker, I am urging also action on the side of the majority leader to be mentioning these things. When he is doing that weekly report, he must also say the following ministers failed to turn up, so that we can note them, and then at the appropriate time, either him or the minority leader can bring a proper motion which should be unanimous, because we'll be referring to a record of absenteeism and failure to exercise duty. Mr. Speaker, as I sit down, I would urge the Cabinet Secretary in charge of Foreign Affairs. The question Honorable Kalwale is asking about deaths of people who are working outside in the Gulf states is a very relevant question, especially, Mr. Speaker, for those of us who come from the coast. All the 6 counties, Mr. Speaker, including Tana River County, there are many, many, many people who go to the Gulf and they do work there. And we have people who have suffered there. And I have some cases that I would have wanted to interrogate. I am asking the Cabinet Secretary, when it comes to matters of life, when matters of death, he should prioritize and come here as soon as possible to come and answer to this question. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Majority Leader, what is your intervention?
Mr. Speaker, I have a further update. The CS for Gender insists that probably there must have been a miscommunication between you and her rather. She says the request she made is that between 11 and 12, that she'd wish to appear later, not to be the first to appear. Therefore, finds the fact that it is still 10 o'clock, that it's premature for us to pass judgment that she's not appearing. And I say that she's finishing up the briefing and will be here by midday. But I'm on a point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Proceed and conclude, Majority Leader.
I have concluded. I have nothing useful to add because it's on your direction, Mr. Speaker, for us to know. Because the letter that she has, remember when we made the decision at SBC yesterday, we told her to appear at 11. The only adjustment she made was that, let me come at 12. Therefore, I stand guided up to that much. I have seen a copy of the letter. We had told her to come at 11.
Thank you. Now, Honorable Senators, let us make progress. I know that the House is extremely disappointed. You are unhappy with the conduct of the Cabinet Secretaries, not just today, for the many times that Cabinet Secretaries have opted not to respect invitations from this House. If we proceed and I give each one of you, the story will be the same, expressing disappointment and displeasure at the conduct of these cabinet secretaries. Now that we have an indication that the Honorable Aisha Jumwa will be with us and will appear before this House at noon, we will proceed under Standing Order 45 to rearrange the sequence of today's order paper so that we proceed with other business as indicated in the order paper, and then once she appears at 12, we will proceed to give her an opportunity to respond to the question that has been directed to her. As far as the Prime Cabinet Secretary is concerned, if the House or any one of you is persuaded that his non-appearance and the reason given for that non-appearance is unreasonable, then you can invoke Standing Order 51D. Otherwise, honorable senators, if it's lamenting, you have done enough. You need to proceed to take action on this matter. Next Wednesday, I will not be surprised if we may not go through the same motion of lamenting. So the Honorable Senator Majority Leader and the Honorable Senator Minority Leader, you need to put this matter to rest. We cannot allow 1 hour, 2 hours of honorable senators lamenting every Wednesday morning. It's either you bite, or when a cabinet secretary does not appear, we just proceed. But we can no longer use our precious time to lament honorable senators. So to the two leaders, you need to lay this matter to rest. Either you. Yes, Honorable. Very well. Honorable Senator.
Speaker, I wanted to seek your clarification on whether the options of this House are limited to the provisions of Standing Order 51D. And the clarity I'm seeking is, why is the option of the fines and other penalties that are available to the committee not available to this House as a whole? That's the clarification I wanted to seek, because this censure motion route is a longer route. At the Committee of Energy, my chairperson, the Honorable Matinga, fines people liberally for failing to appear. I don't know why that is not an action we can take this morning for the failure to appear by the CS, because we are not satisfied with the explanation that he has given.
Very well. Honorable Kalwale.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. I'm rising for clarification, not to doubt or challenge your direction. Mr. Speaker, you cannot dose the responsibility of 51D to the House. This House has a leader of majority. He was the first to state, Mr. Speaker, that we be guided by the decision of this House about the failure of the Prime Cabinet Secretary to appear. Mr. Speaker, the clarification I'm looking for is that you make two pronouncements. The first one is that on our behalf, you direct the leader of the majority to present a motion of censure against the minister. The second one, Mr. Speaker, is for you to read from the same page with the chairs of all our committees, led by the Senator of Kiambu and the Senator of Nyeri. They have been fining governors. From that chair, you pronounce a fine against the responsible minister. And finally, Mr. Speaker, on clarification, if you look at this letter, it is written by the Chief of Staff, Mr. Joseph Usieka. I have never seen in my entire life in this parliament a situation whereby a stranger in a ministry who we don't understand is addressing the Senate or Parliament for that matter. If the Cabinet Secretary is for whatever reason unable to write this letter, it should have been written by the accounting officer, who is the principal secretary. Who is this fellow? I know he comes from my home in Malaba, but Mr. Speaker, that is for purposes of doing funerals at home and weddings and all manner of things. But for purposes of official communication, the Cabinet Secretary must be warned from allowing strangers to address the Senate. A chief of staff is a very small thing, and he's not an accounting officer. The accounting officer, Mr. Speaker, is the principal secretary, whose appointment was approved by Parliament.
Senator Wambua.
I thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we are guided, we will not lament. Mr. Speaker, two issues. One, the matter raised by Senator Halwale on who can address the Senate and who cannot. Mr. Speaker, you need to protect this House and protect committees. The other day, Mr. Speaker, the governor for Nairobi, when he decided he was not going to appear before the Committee on Roads, he sent an acting officer to write to the committee and tell the committee that he cannot attend a meeting. The Speaker, protect this House. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, because this is likely to happen again and again, you'll see that the SBC had agreed that the Cabinet Secretary for Gender was supposed to appear at 11, but later on, it now appears, if we take what the majority leader said, and you have no reason to doubt it, that there was further communication from the minister that she will appear from noon. The Speaker, for guidance, how was that communication done? Was it in writing? Or was it just a conversation, and then it was agreed that she will come at noon? Mr. Speaker, we don't lament because we want to lament. We lament because we are in trouble, Mr. Speaker. If we found ourselves in this situation, what do we do? Did she write to say, I will come at noon, or did she call and say, I'll come at noon? And what then will stop the other cabinet secretaries, Mr. Speaker, from altering the time that they're going to appear by just placing a call to maybe your office or the office of the majority leader and say, good people, I was supposed to come at 9, I'll be appearing at noon or at 11. So the House can do whatever they want to do and wait for me to appear at noon. Mr. Speaker, let's correct this. Thank you.
Senator Kathuri.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, for giving me also this opportunity to make a comment on this matter. Mr. Speaker, where I sit as the chairperson committee, and when we discuss with the chairs, we have like a backlog of statements and petitions. Almost the whole statements are almost now 400, which have not been responded to. Petitions are more than 20 petitions. And the reason, Mr. Speaker, the chairs are complaining that the cabinet secretaries are not honoring their meetings when they are summoned when they are requested to appear before the committees. So, Mr. Speaker, if this trend continues, then the work of the Senate will be paralyzed. And if this is the trend, the majority leader, then we should do away with this question time so that we can divert to our usual business. Because we cannot sit as Senate, through actually the executive, the chief executive of this republic, no other than the president. Actually, this was his brainchild when he was elected as the president. And if this thing is not working for the Senate and for the National Assembly, then there is no need of having this question time by the ministers. Let us just survive the way we have been surviving. So that's also the work of the senators. Petitions in this House, Mr. Speaker, and I will request also the director to give you some time so that you can listen to us. Mr. Speaker, petitions in this House are brought by citizens themselves, most of them. And when we stay with the petitions for 5 months, 6 months without responding to a petition, which has been brought by some communities because they are oppressed, they have issues, then, Mr. Speaker, this House looks very bad to the public. And, Mr. Speaker, that is why we should have a discussion about, do we need to have the CSs appearing before this House? Do we revert to the issue tradition? Which system is working for the Senate? So that, Mr. Speaker, we can be able to expedite our work. I was reporting that we have more than 400 statements which have not been responded to. Actually, the statements have been brought to this House by the members, our fellow senators. And when we meet as liaison, like we'll be doing today at 1, we have no alternative. We just read the figures. How many statements are pending? 400. How many petitions which have exceeded the 60 days? Almost 30 petitions. So, Mr. Speaker, we really need to have a candid discussion. Majority leader will send you to the House in the Hill and tell our boss, not our boss, but the president, that we are not doing so well in this matter on appearance of cabinet secretaries. It is not good for a cabinet secretary to call the speaker by phone that I'm not appearing, or call the majority leader. No. These cabinet secretaries should just do correspondence. The PSs, the clerk of the Senate, writes directly to the PS, communicating anything from the Senate. The same way, only the PS should communicate to the clerk of the Senate. Actually, this letter should be null and void, because this is what we call in Kiswahili madharau. So we need Senate to be treated the way it should be treated. We are very honorable people, even out there when you see us. But the way these CSs are treating us, it's just like primary school or high school boys. So, Mr. Speaker, this House should be respected, and I think we should not, at any time again, though you have put it, Honorable Speaker, that we should come here to win and to cry, but let action be taken. Mr. Majority Leader, don't bother calling any CS to appear. The one who is not interested to appear, we then use 51D promptly so that we can be able to censor these people. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Yes, Senator Ledama. No, clarification.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I was listening to my brother, the Deputy Speaker. And let me say that I like what he was saying. And Majority Leader, my good friend, you know, in reality, the order paper belongs to you because you're the Majority Leader. So when we sit here and start lamenting, we're actually lamenting and pointing a finger at you. You know, I would not want to say that you're failing, but other people could conclude that. This House must be respected. When we stood here, Mr. Speaker, and some of us argued, we interpreted Article 153 of the Constitution to say that a cabinet secretary can only appear before a committee of the House. And it's actually, they are mandated to appear when they're invited to do so. But the judiciary ruled it so it fit that they also appear before plenary. Now that they are here, and that is the reason why we decided to be here, because our side of the House had decided not to attend because we did not want to violate the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, the only thing we ought to do now is to look at the provisions of the laws that gives us powers to punish these individuals who fail to appear. Section 19 of our Parliamentary Powers and Privileges Act is quite clear that whereas a witness has been invited or someone to appear but fails to appear, there are consequences. So I don't know why we are lamenting here. I think we should just do what we did in the last Parliament. In the last Parliament, the Majority Leader was seated here. We censured the Cabinet Secretary of Energy then. And there were consequences that followed. You know, some people, see as if we just come here to talk and talk and talk, but we've got a lot of power. So this power that we have, Mr. Speaker, I want to beseech you to allow this House. And now, since you are the one seated there, you are like the chair of that committee. I think you should be the first one to say that we are now going to apply Section 19 of our Parliamentary Powers and Privileges Act, so that these people can be able to respect this House. The other day, we were given a credit. They said that we are doing better than the National Assembly. We are doing better than the National Assembly because we are diligent and we know the law, we know our rights, and we know the powers. We are here as ombudspersons of citizens who have sent us here to represent them. So, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to beseech you that we become decisive in our decision making. We send strong messages. Because, seriously, when I saw the president saying that he's going to now ensure that the cabinet secretaries appear before the floor of the House, when they fail to appear, what does that mean? I don't want to use slang, but it's like they're showing him the middle finger. Utadu. You know, Mr. Speaker, this is something that we need to be very serious about. We have to respect. The Speaker has got to be respected. Even the President has got to be respected. So, Mr. Speaker, I
think, honorable senators, let this debate lie there. I have indicated and advised that the recourse you have and the recourse that this Senate has, where a cabinet secretary fails to appear without any reasonable cause, then you may invoke Standing Order 51D. So, honorable senators, the reasons you're giving, the contributions you're making are so relevant and will give weight to such a motion. I wish to hear the kind of debate when you're debating that motion. Because as we are talking now, at the end of the day, no resolution can be passed as far as the failure of these CSs is concerned. So majority leader and the minority leader take leadership in this matter. As far as what Senator Sifuna has alluded to, that then can this House, sitting at plenary, impose a fine, just like a committee? Of course we can, but it is the procedure, because you need to pass a resolution. The Speaker cannot impose a fine. The fine can only be imposed by this House through a resolution of this House. So how do we then proceed as a House? Even the amount, even the amount. And my advice will be, what Senator Sifuna has alluded to is very valid, and it is something that next Tuesday, as we sit as SBC, we'll put our heads together so that we neaten out the procedure on how this House can resolve on imposing a fine to a cabinet secretary who has failed to attend. That will be my advice for today. Honorable senators, let us now proceed to tackle the other business in our order paper as we wait for the CS agenda at noon. The mode of communication, yes, that's an issue that has been put forward for determination by honorable senators. The only officer who can communicate to the Senate, just like in the Senate, the only officer who communicates with other institutions out there is the clerk. As far as ministries are concerned, the only officer that will accept the communication It's either the permanent secretary or the CS themselves. Any other letter, any letter written by any officer other than the PS or the CS will be deemed a no communication. So, clerk, this communication has to be communicated to all honorable CSs, that if the Senate received a letter that has no hand of the PS or the Cabinet Secretary, it shall not be deemed to be a communication to the Senate. Kindly communicate that. Now, honorable senators, allow me to invoke Standing Order 45 to rearrange the order paper. Instead of proceeding to discuss order number 8, which is a motion by the Honorable Senator for Mombasa, we will proceed to prosecute order number 9. That is the motion on the status of pending bills in counties. So, clerk, proceed to call that order, please.
Order number 9, motion, status of pending bills in counties.